How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to another skillcapped tier list, this time for patch 11.3. Riot has some huge changes in store with nerfs to items like Goredrinker and Steraks, along with buffs to Sylas, Jinx, Ezreal, and many more. We'll be sure to fill you in on how all the buffs and nerfs affect each champion, and give you guys the best tier list possible thanks to the help of our challenger players combined with the use of data analysis. Viego will be making his very first appearance on our list, and in 3 different roles, being top, mid, and jungle. What do you guys think of the champion so far after his release? We've uploaded a video on our brand new meta channel breaking down all the best builds for Viego, so you should definitely check it out after this one. Our new channel is solely focused around keeping you guys up to date with everything going on in the meta, so there will be a link down below for you to head on over and subscribe. And with all that being said, let's first jump into looking at all the massive item changes. After a few adjustments a couple patches back, Goredrinker is once again targeted for 11.3. The active heal has been reduced from 12 down to 8% missing health. This will in turn nerf champions like Olaf, Aatrox, Riven, and many other fighters who have been really liking this item. Due to the change, we should see a little more diversification in mythics for certain fighter picks. Wukong, for example, has already been performing quite well with Divine Sunderer and Trinity Force, so this nerf to Goredrinker will make those items even more appealing now. Both Riven and Renekton see good success with Prowler's Claw, so swapping to that in games where you're snowballing can be a great alternative. All in all, this change won't mean the end of Goredrinker, it'll just make the champs who buy it slightly weaker, or have them transition to a different mythic so they're able to do so. A component of Goredrinker, Ironspike Whip, has its double damage against minions and monsters that are below 50% HP removed. Now, not only is Goredrinker nerfed, but so is Ravenous Hydra. The Omnivamp has been reduced from 15 down to 10%. For picks like Riven and Aatrox, who build both Goredrinker and Ravenous as their core items, these changes will definitely hurt them a lot more. And then to top it all off, Steraks is the third bruiser item hit as its base shield has been reduced from 200 down to 100, and the shield duration dropping from 5 to 4 seconds. If you're a champion who builds all 3 of these items, your strength for 11.3 will drop a considerable amount. These champs will include Aatrox, Wukong, Riven, and Rengar, so they'll all be hit the hardest. Like we mentioned earlier though, if you're playing a champ who has an alternative build path that's just as strong, the changes won't mean as much. Rengar top can perform just as well with an Eclipse Rush into Essence Reaver and Collector, so this build will become indirectly a lot stronger for 11.3. Aatrox and Riven are also picks who can run Eclipse as their mythic, so by no means should it be the end of the world for these fighters. An item you see purchased second on almost every single enchanter support recently has been Staff of Flowing Water. To try and combat this, Riot will be nerfing the AP on the item from 60 down to 50. The effects of this change will be very minor, and the item will still be bought on everyone who was already purchasing it before. It may just make it so that Ardent becomes a little more enticing as the second pickup in certain games. Seeker's Armguard will once again be nerfed. This time the cost of the item has been increased from 900 up to 1,000. As a result, the total cost of Zhonyas will now be 2,600 instead of 2,500. Even with this nerf, Seekers still end up being one of the most cost-efficient items once you stack the armor on it, so we don't see this change being enough to stop people from buying it. And then one more item nerf for 11.3 is Deadman's Plate. The health sees a reduction from 475 down to 400. The item has started to become really popular on a lot of tank support picks like Galio and Rel. If anything, this change just means those champs will go back to purchasing standard support items again, and it won't shift their power level at all. A few champs it may affect a little bit more are Darius, Poppy, Garen, and Udyr, since Deadmans has always been a really standard second or third pickup for them. This change alone, though, won't single-handedly shift any champion up or down the tier list. A bunch of item buffs to discuss now. First, we have Force of Nature. The movement speed per stack has been increased from 6 up to 8, with the max amount going from 30 up to 40. This will make the item a little more valuable, slotted in as a second, third, or fourth pickup on tanks and certain bruisers where the enemy comp has a lot of magic damage. We have another buff to tanks for 11.3 with Frozen Heart seeing its cost reduced by 200 and the armor going down as well from 80 to 70. 200 less gold for 10 less armor is a great trade-off, as it allows you to hit this item spike a little sooner. The gold efficiency for armor works out to being 20 gold for 1 armor, so you're losing the exact amount of armor that is worth the 200 gold. For someone like Nasus who likes to build this second, this change will allow him to come online a little sooner to hit that mid-game spike. One of the most undervalued items in the game is actually seeing buffs for this patch. Chemtech Putrifier, the cheap Grievous Wounds option, has its haste increased from 15 up to 20 and will now give allies the Grievous Wounds effect when shielded or healed. This is a massive buff to this item and will make it a great second item purchase on heal and shield supports when against heavy healing enemy comps. This change can also end up indirectly buffing ADCs too. If a support picks it up and can apply AoE heals or shields for their team, Executioners will no longer be as necessary of a pickup. Seraphine and Sona are 2 picks to really watch out for with Chemtech, since they can apply this new Grievous Wounds passive so easily. If you were hoping for more Yasuo, Yone, and Samira buffs, then that's exactly what you're getting here with Shieldbow. Riot has buffed its AD, going from 50 to 55, and the attack speed increased from 15 up to 20%. In total, this adds 275 gold worth of stats to the item for free. After Gale Force was nerfed last patch, this now makes Shieldbow a much better pickup, not only on Samira, Yas, and Yone, but on other ADC picks as well. The diversity in ADC Mythics should now be at an all-time high in 11.3. PD is having a bunch of its stats shifted around. The item will now give 20 AD instead of 0. Attack speed has been reduced from 45 down to 25%. The max stacks for bonus attack speed has been lowered from 5 down to 4. And the bonus attack speed at max stack is lowered from 40 down to 30%. Even though you're losing out on a decent chunk of attack speed, the bonus AD will be welcoming for a little more upfront damage. We may see PD become a more attractive option on Yasuo and Yone, but for most champs, it'll remain pretty niche. Next up, LDR will have its armor pen buffed from 25 to 35%. In previous patches, there just hasn't been a fit for this item in most ADC build paths, and even with this change, it will likely still remain a very niche 3rd or 4th pickup only against heavy tank comps. One of the more interesting changes for 11.3 is to Verdant Barrier, a component to Banshees Veil. The passive has been changed so that killing a unit now grants 1 permanent magic resist for a maximum of 15. The cost has also been reduced from 1200 to 1000. Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? Verdant can actually be a rush item on AP champs now against burst assassins or mages. Due to the cost reduction and stacking of magic resist, the item will be well over 100% efficient for 11.3. Similar to Seekers, you can just sit on this item now until the mid game so that you have all that MR for such a cheap value. Especially in games where the enemy comp consists of an AP mid and jungle, the value from this item will be very high. On top of this, Banshees Veil is being buffed too. For a cost increase of 2500 to 2600, the AP on the item has been increased from 65 up to 80. Overall, both these changes will be really nice for mages and will help them out a ton when against AP assassin picks. We got another mage buff here with Horizon Focus receiving an AP increase from 100 up to 115. The Hyper Shot minimum range has been buffed as well, going from 750 down to 700. Lux, Xerath, Vel'Koz, and Ahri are a few picks that come to mind who will really like this change and become indirectly stronger for 11.3. And then for one more item buff, we have Silvermere Dawn seeing its AD increased from 35 to 40 and health going from 200 up to 300. I bet if you asked a bunch of people about this item, half of them wouldn't even have known it existed. If you're in that boat, it's the Bruiser version of Scimitar as it builds out of QSS, but provides health instead of crit. It's been a pretty niche item since its release, but will be much stronger now in games where the enemy comp has some heavy AP and CC. It won't become core on any champ or anything, but as a 3rd or 4th pickup, it'll be a lot stronger in certain games. A couple item adjustments for this patch include Leeching Leer receiving an Omnivamp nerf from 10 down to 5%, but a health increase from 150 to 250. The item that Leeching Leer builds into, Riftmaker, sees some similar changes. Omnivamp has been reduced from 15 down to 8%, health up from 150 to 300, and the Mythic passive changed from 5% Magic Pen to 8 AP and 2% Omnivamp. So, what do these changes mean for the item? Not much, to be honest. Riftmaker is already such a niche item, and even on the champs prioritizing it most, like Akali and Mordekaiser, they actually perform better with Rocket Belt. Removing Omnivamp for some extra health won't really do much in the grand scheme of things, so expect the item to remain an underwhelming pickup. And then the final item change we have to cover is Eclipse. Once again, the healing is being targeted on this one. Omnivamp has been reduced from 10 down to 8%, but the shield increased from 150 up to 180 for melee, and 75 up to 90 for ranged. This change should end up pretty power neutral and even more of a buff in certain situations. The champions who purchased Eclipse in previous patches will continue to do so in 11.3. So now that you're all up to date with the item changes, let's dive into the top lane and break down the meta for the role in 11.3. The first champion we need to discuss is Cho'Gath. He's received a decent damage nerf to his E, dropping from 22 scaling to 82 down to 22 scaling to 70. Keep in mind, you have 3 charges of this spell, so in total, it works out to be a 36 damage nerf if all procs are applied. Considering how many other fighters are being hit harder with the item nerfs, this change will be nothing more than a little poke to void monsters' flesh. With buffs to tank items like Frozen Heart and Force of Nature, Cho will continue to thrive in 11.3. Despite the direct nerf, he will be placed in our OP tier as the buffs to Chemtech and Frostfire, along with Stoneplate last patch, really pushed him over the edge. A pick who's been in our top lane OP tier the past while now is Pantheon, but that won't be the reality anymore after this nerf. The 70% damage reduction from Pantheon Q against minions will now also be applied against monsters, so this one is more of a nerf to Jungle Panth. The change that affects top lane Panth is his Q cooldown being increased from 10 scaling to 8 seconds up to 13 scaling to 8 seconds. This 3-second increase is a pretty massive nerf to his early game power and will surely put a dent in his shield for 11.3. As a result, we will be moving Pantheon out of OP and down into S. A champion I don't think I've actually seen a single time in Season 11 is Singed, so for good reason, he's been buffed this patch. Q AP ratio sees an increase going from 80 up to 90%, not the craziest buff in the world, but also nothing to scoff at either. We've had Singed down in the B tier for the last few patches now, so with this change, he's going to make his way out, up into A. One champion Riot is compensating for all the bruiser item nerfs is Riven. Her E cooldown has been reduced by a whole 2 seconds at every rank. Since the Ravenous and Goredrinker changes will take a chunk out of her power level, these buffs will help to neutralize things and leave Riven in a similar spot to where she was last patch. If more players start building Prowler's Claw instead of Goredrinker, then there is a way Riven can actually come out of all this with net positive changes. For now, we will be holding Riven in the A tier. As with any large item changes, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where the champion will land in the following patch. One more top laner to receive a change for 11.3 is Mordekaiser, but she's kind of been given the short end of the stick. Mord's E cooldown has been decreased by 2 seconds at all ranks. Since the spell was already on such a long cooldown early at 24 seconds, a 2-second decrease won't do anything to impact Mord's trading patterns or give him any meaningful windows that he can punish. The actual buff to Mord is fighters becoming weaker due to their item nerfs, which will in turn boost up his power level a little. For this reason, he will be placed in our A tier. Alright, now for the complete top lane tier list. Cho'Gath and Volibear will be the 2 new additions to the OP tier, alongside Darius, Camille, and Malphite, who have all been strong for a while now. With so many bruiser items being nerfed this patch and Frostfire Gauntlet buffed in 11.2, both Cho and Volley along with the other tanks rise in priority for 11.3. The Frozen Heart buffs will propel Nasus up into S tier. Not a single item he builds regularly got nerfed this patch either, which gives him an edge over many other bruisers. Sylas will be moving up into A tier with the buffs he's getting for this patch. We will take a look at those changes when covering mid lane. Viego will see his very first appearance on our top lane list in the A tier. The short CD on his Q and crazy sustain allows him to lane really nicely. If you're looking to pick the champ up, then be sure to check out our video on the 5 best Viego builds. The 3 best low elo picks of the patch are Cho'Gath, Garen, and Nasus, and the best bans will remain Darius, Malphite, and Camille. The jungle role has been heavily nerf focused for 11.3, and first up is Olaf. Olaf's early game dueling is being hit as his base health has been dropped from 597 down to 575. Passive attack speed based on missing health has been lowered as well, going from 0 scaling to 100% down to 0 scaling to 70%. Keep in mind both Goredrinker and Steraks have been hit too, which have been the big core items on Olaf in previous patches. With all these nerfs considered, we will be dropping the Axe Thrower down to A tier. A small nerf to Ramus has been issued. His E cooldown is increased from 12 scaling down to 10 seconds up to 12 seconds at all ranks. This nerf won't be enough to drop Ramus down on our list. He will still remain a low elo god for another patch. Elise is the third jungler targeted, as her Q damage has been lowered from 40 scaling to 180 down to 40 scaling to 160. Elise W's spider attack speed has been reduced from 60 scaling to 140 down to 60 scaling to 100%. These nerfs won't mean too much for Elise, as her numbers are being hit in the later ranks of these abilities. Rank 1 power of both spells remain the exact same, so her early game threat will still be top tier. For this reason, Elise will keep a seat in the S tier for 11.3. After multiple buffs in a row and great item synergy, Ivern turned into one of the best junglers in the game. Last patch, he was nerfed, and he'll receive a couple more with his health per level dropping from 95 down to 85, and E-Shield reduced from 80 scaling to 220 down to 80 scaling to 200. Add on the indirect nerf from Staff of Flowing Water, and we will have to drop Ivern from our OP tier down into S. If you were to bet on which junglers would be nerfed for Season 11, I don't think many would have to put money on Udyr. That's become reality now, though, as his R aura damage has been reduced from 50 scaling to 300 down to 50 scaling to 275. For Udyr to be nerfed before someone like Hecarim is just beyond all of us at skillcapped, but to be fair, this nerf won't shift Udyr's power level much at all. Keep in mind that Deadmans has been a pretty core second item on the champ, so when you tack on that nerf, it gets a little more dicey. We're confident even with these changes, Udyr will still remain a really strong pick, so he will keep his spot in the S tier. A jungler who's been an OP pick in high elo ever since a damage buff to monsters has been Talia, so Riot will be reverting a chunk of that buff. Talia's Q damage to monsters after the first hit has been lowered from 100 down to 80%. And then on top of this, Riot's actually reverting the nerf they gave to Talia's passive move speed. It'll be going back up from 12 scaling to 40% now to 20 scaling to 45%. As a result of these changes, Talia will remain in our S tier, but we'll be keeping a close eye on her. She'll definitely be a pick on the bubble. And then, for the lone jungler who's been buffed for 11.3 is Shyvana. Shiv's been one of the basement-dwelling junglers for the past while now. The removal of ability haste on Nashers and just less access to CDR in general left Shyvana in a really terrible spot. Shyvana's Q will now have an AP ratio of 40%, and her W move speed will have one tacked on as well, giving her 8% move speed per 100 AP. With these buffs in mind, we'll be moving the dragon up 2 full tiers from C into A for 11.3. Now, for the jungle tier lists, guys, in the OP tier, we have just 2 picks for this patch, being Hecarim and Kha'Zix. We can understand Ka dodging nerfs since he may be too invisible for Riot to see, but Hecarim is literally a massive horse, so it makes no sense how he's avoiding the nerf bat. Jokes aside, these 2 picks have been top tier for the past couple months now, and with the plethora of other junglers being nerfed, it only makes them stronger. We already touched on the Pantheon changes when covering top lane, but they'll also see an effect for jungle Pantheon, especially with the damage nerf to monsters. He'll be dropping from S down to A tier. Viego will be placed in the A tier, but definitely has room to move higher in the coming patches. Fiddle, Rammus, and Warwick will continue dominating the lower brackets for 11.3, so definitely add one of them to your champ pools if you haven't already. Our 3 recommended bans will include both the OP picks in Kha'Zix and Hecarim alongside Viego. We got just a few changes for mid lane, starting off with Anivia. Her Q base damage has been lowered from 70 scaling to 210 down to 60 scaling to 200. The AP ratio has been reduced as well, going from 50 down to 45%. Ultimate cooldown season increase at the later ranks, going from 4 scaling to 1 second up to 4 scaling to 2 seconds. These changes will help push Anivia down a little, but our analysts don't think they will be enough to remove her from the OP tier. At the very most, she drops to S, but will stay in OP for the time being. Sylas is up next, and Riot's given him some pretty solid buffs. His Q mana cost has been reduced from 50 scaling to 75 to just 55 at all ranks. This is a nerf at rank 1, but if you're maxing Q out first, then this change will be a pretty impactful buff. W base damage has been increased from 65 scaling to 205 up to 70 scaling to 210. The AP ratio on W has been bumped up by 5, going from 85 to 90%. These changes could very well push Sylas back up into S tier, but we see him more realistically fitting in as a good A tier pick for 11.3. And then the third mid change we have is for Vladimir. His ultimate cooldown has been reduced from 150 scaling to 120 to a flat 120 at all ranks. This definitely helps out Vlad's ability to snowball and make aggressive plays more often early on. Technically, he's receiving an indirect nerf for this patch through the Chemtech Putrifier changes, so all in all, we don't see Vlad shifting on the tier list. He's going to remain in our A tier for now. The mid lane tier list will look pretty similar to last patch. Galio, Anivia, and Fizz will be our 3 OP picks as Pantheon has dropped out with the nerf to his Q. Yasuo and Yone are both jumping up into S tier due to the Immortal Shieldbow buffs. Believe it or not, Viego is seeing the most success as a mid laner and will be placed in the S tier. Lots of pros have been popping off with the pick, and he's one of the better mids in the game right now, so hop aboard the train before it's too late. The 3 best low elo picks of that patch are Nivea, Malzahar, and Annie. We've shifted around the best bans a little with both Viego and Yone rising in priority. Fizz is still a really good option as well. We've got just 2 direct changes for ADC in 11.3, with Jinx and Ezreal both receiving buffs. First up for Jinx, her Q range gets an increase going from 75 scaling to 175, up to 100 scaling to 200. 25 extra range at all ranks will see her rise up a little, but won't be enough to reach the heights of Kai'Sa and Jhin. Jinx will stay put in our A tier. Ez has really been struggling the past couple patches here, so his Q-AD ratio has been bumped up by 10%. With so many other ADCs being able to benefit from the Shieldbow buffs, Ez's relative power level won't increase at all with this change. B tier will be where he lives for another patch. We do have a couple of movements on our ADC tier list due to some indirect changes along with adjustments from last patch. Senna overshot our expectations after her buffs, and she's been performing super well. She's being placed in the S tier, not too far behind the elite in Jhin and Kai'Sa. With the Shieldbow buffs, we are confident in moving Samira back up into S tier. MF, Swain, and Tristana will once again be our top 3 low elo picks. And for the best ADC bans, Kai'Sa is #1 priority, followed by Jhin and Samira. And last but definitely not least, let's take a look at support role. Seraphine is the only support hit with a couple nerfs in 11.3. Her passive note damage has been lowered from 5 scaling to 20 down to 4 scaling to 16. W ally shield has been reduced from 60 scaling to 120 down to 50 scaling to 100. Self shield from W is lowered as well, going from 90 scaling to 180 down to 75 scaling to 150. These nerfs are heavily targeted at reducing Seraphine's mid to late game power. Since you don't max W until last, the nerfs won't be felt too much until level 14 onwards. Since most games won't even last that long, the big reduction of shielding once W is maxed won't actually be as impactful as it may seem on paper. The Staff of Flowing Water nerfs will be another shot to Seraphine's strength, but regardless, we are still really confident the champ will remain a priority pick for 11.3. We'll keep her in the OP for now, but at the very most, we may have to adjust her down to S next patch. Transitioning from the most OP enchanter of previous patches to now looking at one of the worst, we have some buffs for Karma. Her mana regen has been lifted, going from 11.5 to 13, and Q mana cost decreased from 65 down to 55. Riot surely could have given Karma a little bit more, especially since Staff has been a core second item on her and it's being nerfed. She's sat down in the B tier for the past while now, and we just don't see that changing with these buffs. And then Rel has received a change, so her E cooldown when unbinding from herself has been reduced from 3 down to 1 second. A bug fix so her E will now properly buffer when cast on an ally from outside the range has also been issued. Rel was on the edge of OP in the previous patch, and like we said, any small change will push her over, which is exactly what this will do. So, for the complete support tier list, Rel will be joining Leona, Lulu, Seraphine, and a newcomer Galio on the OP tier. With Rel rising up in power, she's going to be played a lot more, and Galio can be a really great pick into her. Samira will rise back up in priority for 11.3 as well, and Galio has absolutely nuts synergy with that champ, which will indirectly make him an even better pick. He's already a great counter to Leona and Maokai, so don't sleep on him for 11.3. Speaking of Maokai, we originally expected him to remain in OP after his nerfs last patch, but they hit him harder than anticipated, so we will be adjusting him down into S tier. Low elo picks for support are Swain, Rel, and Seraphine, and for the top 3 bans, our analysts recommended Leona, Seraphine, and Morgana. So that's going to wrap things up for the 11.3 tier list. To stay up to date each patch with every tier list we upload, don't forget to subscribe. Good luck in solo queue, and we will see you all next time.